Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. Tonight, I will tell you more stories from Greek mythology to entertain you and lull you to sleep. First, we will relive the legend of Perseus and his main exploit, his fight against Medusa. Then I will tell you about the myth of the Labyrinth, where Theseus had to lose himself to face the Minotaur and escape with Ariadne. We will also discuss the myth of Prometheus, the Titan who brought fire to man and was punished for it. So we have a lot to discuss and discover. But first, I would like to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project, get more of it, and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish to or can, and everybody gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will gain access to several exclusive episodes, and also to all our episodes with and without background sounds. We offer advance releases to our patrons as well. We have added links to Patreon, as well as links to different streaming options, which may be better suited for you. You will find a link in the description of the episode, along with timestamps to allow you to resume the episode wherever you left off, in case you do fall asleep. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now assume a comfortable position, maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now it's storytelling time. Let's get started with the first story, the story of Perseus. Our story begins in the very distant past of ancient Greece. So long ago that the great Greek cities had not risen yet, and very few heroes were known. This was long before the Trojan War, long before the time of Heracles, and the ancient Greeks had not yet begun to explore the sea, nor developed their science and their art. In this archaic Greece, there was a small but powerful kingdom around the city of Argos in the south of Greece. The king of Argos was named Acrisius, and his biggest concern was his inability, his lack of luck in having a son. One day, Acrisius consulted the oracle of Apollo at Delphi to know why and what he should do to have a son. But the oracle delivered a worrying prophecy. Acrisius was warned that one day he would be killed by his daughter's son. Acrisius had a daughter, Danaë, and she was already of age to give birth. Acrisius could not let this happen, so when he came back to Argos, he decided to imprison her in the courtyard of his palace. He had a chamber built, a chamber made of bronze with high walls and no windows, so that no one could be able to enter. The only opening was up. It was open to the sky, and Danaë was placed inside. The king thought that this prison of metal would prevent his daughter from ever having a son, and so he would never be killed. But the oracle had never said that only ordinary men could give him a grandson. There were the gods too. From the top of Mount Olympus, the king of gods, Zeus, had been watching, and the mere fact that Danaë had been locked up caught his attention and made her attractive to him. So one night he descended to the bronze chamber in the form of a shower of shiny little stars that enchanted the desperate princess in her prison. And that night he fathered her son, Perseus. Soon after, Perseus was born. King Acrisius realized that the prophecy was beginning to happen, but killing his own grandson, the offspring of the god, was unthinkable. It defied not only the laws of man, but it would also provoke the wrath of the gods. So instead, he had the mother and the child locked into a wooden chest, and the chest cast into the sea. The chest would sink or drift and take them to an abandoned island, and this way he would not appear as a murderer. And so it was done. Mother and child, Danaë and Perseus, were abandoned at sea, and the chest drifted away. Life in Argos resumed, and the memory of the prophecy, of the bronze chamber, and of the king's daughter herself began to fade. But the chest didn't sink. For days it drifted with Danaë and the baby Perseus crying inside. After what seemed to be an eternity, Danaë felt that the chest was no longer moving. They had washed ashore on an island, and they might survive after all. The island was called Seriphos. And soon the chest was found by a fisherman, who liberated the mother and her child and took them in. Danaë had lost her place as a princess, but she had gained freedom. The fisherman was a good man, and even though they lived in poverty, a happy period began for the three of them. They lived humbly in a village near the shore. The fisherman raised Perseus like a son for 16 years, teaching him how to fish and be content with nothing more than the strict necessities. That Danaë was the daughter of a king, Perseus was the son of a god, and it was written in the threads of destiny that their lives could not be ordinary. The island of Seriphos was another small kingdom, and its king, Polydectes, often inspected his possessions around the island. As Perseus reached manhood, Polydectes visited their village and fell in love with Danaë, who had remained very beautiful despite the passing of time. The king didn't have a good reputation, and Perseus was very protective of his mother. So the young man did everything he could, so the two could not be alone. Polydectes was a coward and didn't dare to fight the vigorous young man. He ruled by cunning, and this was how he tried to get rid of Perseus. He plotted to send him away in disgrace, and to achieve this he organized a banquet and invited all the wealthy people on the island, plus Perseus. Each guest was expected to bring a gift, and Polydectes instructed them to bring him horses under the pretense that he collected them. This was not a problem for any of the guests. They owned plenty of horses, but obviously Perseus had nothing and had to appear at the banquet empty-handed, which was shameful and disrespectful to his host, the king. Perseus stayed calm despite the humiliation inflicted by Polydectes, and asked him to name any other gift he wanted. He promised to do anything possible to bring it. That was a risky promise, and exactly what the king had hoped for. So he asked Perseus to bring him an unobtainable gift: the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgons, the 3 monstrous sisters that had existed since the dawn of time. They had female bodies, but their hair was made of living, venomous snakes, and their faces were horrifying. Those who saw their faces and established eye contact with any of the Gorgons were instantly turned to stone. 2 of the Gorgons were immortal, but it was known that their sister Medusa was not. She could in theory be killed, but no one could approach her because her gaze was enough to kill any person foolish enough to attempt approaching her. And so Medusa was in practice invincible, almost as much as her 2 sisters. The adopted son of a fisherman was no match for such a terrifying creature, and so, to the king, there was no doubt that Perseus would fail, and hopefully die trying. Danaë would be his. What he ignored was that Perseus was no mere mortal. He was a demigod, and it was high time he received help from the gods. Zeus had fathered many children and never raised them. He generally forgot their mothers as soon as he had gotten what he wanted from them. But he cared enough to keep an eye on his numerous sons, and so did goddess Athena, who felt close to mankind and was always willing to help heroes accomplish exploits and triumph over all the obstacles that fate put in their way. As Perseus had received Polydectes' request, which was equivalent to a death sentence, and wondered desperately what he could do, Athena appeared to him in a dream. She revealed that he would need weapons before approaching Medusa. Otherwise, he would not stand a chance. To collect them, he needed to find the Hesperides, who were entrusted with weapons that could help him. The Hesperides were nymphs, minor deities of nature, who had been placed in a magnificent garden, an orchard that belonged to Hera, Zeus's wife. The Hesperides protected and tended this orchard that no mortal had ever visited nor even found. Its location was unknown, including for Athena, and the only way to find them was to ask yet other creatures, the Graii. There were various triads of divine or immortal female creatures in those times. The 3 Gorgons were one of these triads, and the Hesperides another. As charming and attractive as the Gorgons were repulsive and deadly. The Graii were another triad of 3 sisters, 3 perpetually old women. They had appeared already old in the distant past, and always stayed together because they shared a single mind and a single eye, passing it from one to another. Nobody understood whether they were 3 persons or a single person with 3 bodies, but they had received knowledge of many things about the world. They knew more than any human and often more than the gods themselves. They would know, of all people, how to find the garden of the Hesperides. Perseus now knew what to do, and he followed Athena's advice. He built a raft and left the island, embarking on a quest that would become legendary. Guided by Athena, he found the island of the Grey, where the three old women lived in a cave around the fire and never received any visitors. But they were not surprised to see him, because they knew the frame of destiny, and since the beginning of their existence, they had known that on this precise day, Perseus, son of the god Zeus and the mortal Danaë, would visit them. They also knew what would happen next, and so they let it happen. As the three women were passing their single eye from one to another, Perseus snatched it from them. The three Grei were now blind, and Perseus had their one eye. He offered to give it back in return for the location of the nymphs, the location of the Hesperides. Their garden was on another plane of reality and could not be accessed by traveling in the physical world. But the Grey had the power to lead someone there, and as had been written since the beginning of time, they agreed to send Perseus there in return for their eye, and so it was done. Perseus was taken to the garden of the Hesperides, and the Grey got their eye. The three old women can now return to their eternal waiting. Hera's orchard was the closest thing to paradise in the universe. It was covered in a carpet of green grass, and all trees bore delicious fruits. The sun always shined, and the temperature was always perfect, and a mild breeze carrying the delicious scent of the exotic flowers blew all the time. There were many wonders to explore in the garden, but Perseus had his mission in mind, and he did not let anything distract him. He found the nymphs, and to his surprise, they were not alone. Athena had joined them, together with the god Hermes, the messenger of the gods. Zeus himself, his father, was also present. They all had gifts for him that would help him accomplish his goal to slay Medusa. The Hesperides gave him a special bag, a knapsack, which could safely contain Medusa's head, because even if he could kill the creature and cut her head, it would keep its terrifying power to turn people to stone. Zeus gave him a magnificent sword made of diamond and a helm. The helm belonged to his brother Hades, the god of the underworld, and it was a helm of darkness. The wearer of this helm disappeared from anyone's sight. Hermes lent Perseus a pair of winged sandals. These were magical, and their wearer could fly. Finally, Athena gave him a perfectly polished shield, so polished that it could reflect things almost like a mirror. Now powerfully equipped, Perseus was sent back to the human world, and he proceeded to the Gorgon's cave, where Medusa and her two sisters lived. No man in his right mind would have dared to approach it. In the cave, Medusa was sleeping, but the mere sight of her face would have turned any human into stone. So Perseus had to be very cautious. Medusa had not always been a monster, and she was somewhat different from her two sisters because she once was human and had been cursed by the goddess Athena herself. Long ago, Medusa was a priestess of Athena and lived in the goddess's temple. But one day, the god Poseidon visited the temple and forced himself on the young priestess, who didn't dare to resist the god, and in any case, did not have the strength to do it. When Athena learned of it, she was merciless and decided to punish the young princess, even though it was not her fault. The temple had been desecrated, and someone had to pay for it. It couldn't be Poseidon because he was a god. So it would be Medusa instead, even though that wasn't fair from a human point of view. And so Medusa was cursed. Snakes came out of her head. Her gaze was made deadly, and she was sent to live with the other Gorgons far from mankind, where no one would ever desire her again. Medusa had gone mad due to this tragedy and became the monster inside and out that Athena had wanted her to become. To avoid her dangerous gaze, Perseus approached silently, viewing only Medusa's reflection in the shield, which neutralized her power. When he was close enough, he cut her head and swiftly placed it inside the bag offered by the Hesperides. Long ago, when Medusa and Poseidon had mated, two creatures were conceived. However, Athena's curse prevented them from seeing the light of day. Medusa's death ended the curse. Suddenly, from the neck of the dead monster sprang two beings. Poseidon and Medusa's offspring saw the light of day. The first was a magnificent horse, Pegasus, and the second a demigod, Chrysaor. Perseus has no time for them because the two other Gorgons awoke and discovered their sister had been killed. They pursued him, but Perseus put on his helm of darkness, which allowed him to escape. The most difficult part of his mission was accomplished, and Perseus now had to return to Seriphos, where he would present Medusa's head to the king and clear his name. However, it was not written that this would be simple. The Gorgon's cave was far from Seriphos. Perseus was exhausted and needed to rest. After distancing himself sufficiently from the two surviving Gorgons, he reached the kingdom governed by the king Atlas. There was a titan named Atlas, sentenced to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But this was another Atlas, a man whose main wealth and pride was an orchard with golden apples. Atlas had been warned by a prophecy that one day a son of Zeus would arrive in his kingdom to steal his golden apples. Although there was no shortage of Zeus's sons, out of precaution he refused hospitality to Perseus and asked him to leave immediately. This went against the laws of hospitality, and rejecting a demigod was an offense. In response, Perseus opened his bag and revealed the severed head of Medusa. The head had lost none of its power, and instantly King Atlas was turned into stone. Some say even into an entire mountain chain, the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. The journey of Perseus continued, and there was nothing left for him. At his previous stop, he eventually found himself in another kingdom, Ethiopia, located to the southwest of the known world. While on his quest, a tragedy had unfolded in Ethiopia, a kingdom ruled by King Sisyphus and his wife, Queen Cassiopeia. They had a daughter, Andromeda, whose extraordinary beauty led their subjects and themselves to compare her attractiveness to that of the goddess Aphrodite herself. In her pride, Cassiopeia claimed that Andromeda's beauty surpassed even that of the Nereids, the sea nymphs who often accompanied Poseidon. Poseidon was enraged by the audacity of a mere mortal like Cassiopeia, comparing her daughter to divine beings. In his wrath, he took revenge on the entire kingdom of Ethiopia by sending a devastating flood that overwhelmed the land, drowning many. With this flood came a monstrous sea serpent, which destroyed everything and threatened the survivors who sought refuge on the hills and mountains of Ethiopia. An oracle was consulted, revealing that the only way to appease Poseidon's fury and save the kingdom was to offer Andromeda as a sacrifice to the monster. Her death was supposed to calm the beast, allowing the survivors to rebuild their devastated kingdom. And so Andromeda, doomed by her mother's boastful remarks and the god's wrath, was fastened naked to a rock on the shore, where the monster would soon devour her. The sea serpent approached, and in Andromeda's despair, perhaps her prayers were answered. Oh, it was mere coincidence. When Perseus arrived just as the monster was about to reach her. Seeing her peril, Perseus slew the horrible beast, freeing Andromeda. Captivated by her beauty, he claimed the right to marry her, despite her earlier betrothal to another man, Phineus. The wedding took place shortly thereafter. However, Phineus was furious over the situation, plotted against Perseus with his friends and co-conspirators. They planned to incite a quarrel at the wedding, were Perseus isolated and without allies in Ethiopia. They would kill him, allowing Andromeda to be returned to Phineus. But things did not turn out as expected for the conspirators. When they started to tease and attack Perseus at the wedding, he took out the head of Medusa. In a second, all his attackers were turned to statues, frozen in their aggressive postures. The wedding ended in more death, but Andromeda was now his, and the two were happy together. There was nothing for them in Ethiopia, as Andromeda had been offered as a sacrifice by her very parents, and Perseus had been attacked at his wedding. So the following day they decided to leave, and Andromeda was happy to accompany him back to Seriphos, where they might be able to start a new life. Pegasus, the winged horse, had joined Perseus, who had allowed it to be born by killing Medusa, and had become his mount. So the newlyweds traveled to Seriphos on Pegasus' back. Perseus returned victorious to the island where he had grown up, but the situation there had worsened for his mother, Danaë. She had had to go into hiding to escape the violent advances of Polydectes. The hero immediately confronted the king, and once again he used the head of Medusa. To everyone's surprise, he appeared at the king's court and announced that he had brought back the gift he had been sent to collect. He took it out of his bag and presented it to Polydectes, turning the vile man into stone. Perseus's triumph over adversity closed the cycle, and life resumed peacefully. He returned his magical loans, Hermes' sandals, the helm of darkness, Zeus's sword. He gave Medusa's head as a gift to Athena. But even though a new life could begin for Andromeda and himself, there was still the fear of the prophecy that announced that Acrisius, the king of Argos, would be killed by his grandson. This was the reason why Danaë had been placed into a prison long ago, and then abandoned at sea in a chest with baby Perseus. Many years later, with a new life, the hero didn't really try or think of taking revenge of his grandfather. However, the oracle of Apollo was never wrong, and one way or another it had to be fulfilled. And this is how it happened. At the time, athletic games took place in cities around Greece. Young athletes traveled to show their strength and ability in these competitions. Perseus attended such games held in the city of Larissa, not only competing successfully, but also inventing a new game called the quoit. In this game, heavy metal rings had to be thrown over a distance to land over a spike or as close as possible to it. He was making a public display of this new game when, by coincidence, King Acrisius the Argos walked nearby. The now old king was unaware that his daughter and grandson had survived. Many years had passed, and the memory of the prophecy no longer bothered him. Involuntarily, he stepped into the trajectory of the quoits, just as Perseus was throwing one. He was hit and killed by his grandson, just as the oracle had predicted. The prophecy was now fulfilled. Tradition added more to Perseus' legacy. He became a king and founded the city of Mycenae, which gave its name to Mycenaean Greece, the archaic Greek culture that preceded classical Greece during the Bronze Age. Perseus was considered the greatest Greek hero and one of the most ancient heroes in Greek mythology, matched or surpassed only later by Heracles, Hercules in Latin. Interestingly, Heracles was also his half-brother, and they were both sons of Zeus and his great-grandson through Heracles' mother. Zeus was not the only god to father heroes. Poseidon, the god of the seas and horses, also did. The hero of our second story was the son of Poseidon, Theseus, the one who traveled to Crete and found his way into the Labyrinth to slay the monstrous Minotaur. This story occurred before Athens rose to prominence and began on the island of Crete so long ago. So let's find out what the myth goes like. Very long ago, several generations before the Trojan War, there was a powerful king in Crete named Minos. He ruled not only over Crete from his palace in Knossos, but also the islands of the Aegean Sea, which he had conquered using his powerful navy. However, behind his power and success lay a tragic curse. When Minos was fighting against his brother for the throne of Crete, even before his reign began, he had asked for the support of the god Poseidon. His prayers were heard, and he received the god's favor. Thanks to this, he prevailed over his brothers and became king. As a symbol of Poseidon's support, Minos received a bull as white as snow, which he had to sacrifice in the god's honor. But the bull was so beautiful that Minos could not bring himself to sacrifice it. Instead, he sacrificed a substitute bull. Poseidon was infuriated and made Minos' wife fall in love with the bull as punishment, an absurd and unnatural fate. But the queen was unable to resist the attraction, and she mated with the bull. As a result, the monstrous hybrid was conceived, the Minotaur, with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The queen, still under Poseidon's spell, nursed him, but the Minotaur quickly grew in size and became ferocious, even dangerous to his own mother. The creature could only feed on human flesh and would never be able to live among humans. Minos didn't know what to do because killing the beast could infuriate Poseidon even more. So he went to the oracle at Delphi to ask for guidance. The oracle recommended constructing a structure to contain the monster, which would neutralize it without having to kill it. In Minos' court, there was a skilled craftsman and architect named Daedalus. Minos asked him to design and construct a gigantic labyrinth to hold the Minotaur, and so it was done. The labyrinth was built underground near Minos' palace, and the beast was placed inside. Despite this curse, Minos had taken control of all Crete and was at war with other kingdoms in Greece, including Athens, achieving victory. The son of Minos was killed by the Athenians, and as retribution, the king of Crete attacked Athens and won. As a condition for peace, he demanded that every 7 years, Athens send him 14 young and attractive citizens, 7 young men and 7 maidens, who would be offered as sacrificial victims to the Minotaur. The youth would be sent into the labyrinth and would either be eaten by the Minotaur or get lost and perish of starvation. The Athenians opted to randomly select these 14 victims every 7 years. When the time of the sacrifice came, all Athenians' families lived in terror that their sons or daughters might be chosen and sacrificed. Once, a ship sailed with 14 victims who never came back. This happened again 7 years later. However, the third time, one man volunteered to join the group, and this man was Theseus. Theseus had recently arrived in Athens, but he was connected to the city. Before he was born, the king of Athens, Aegeus, had traveled to the kingdom of Troezen, where his host, the king of Troezen, offered him his daughter. Aegeus was concerned at the time he didn't have a son, so he attempted to have one with her. However, during his stay in Troezen, the woman was impregnated by Poseidon instead. She became pregnant, but not by the king of Athens. So Aegeus abandoned her and returned to the city. Before leaving, he left his sandals and a sword under a huge rock and said that if the son to be born could one day move the rock, proving he was heroic and strong enough, then he could collect and keep these objects as evidence of his royal heritage, and Aegeus would recognize him as his son. After his departure, a son was born, the son of the princess and Poseidon, and this son was named Theseus. Theseus was raised by his mother, and one day he attempted to move the rock. Having inherited much strength from his godly father, he was able to retrieve the objects left by Aegeus. His mother then told him what had happened, and he resolved to travel to Athens to make Aegeus keep his word and recognize him as his son, a rightful heir to the throne of Athens. Theseus traveled from Troezen to Athens, experiencing extraordinary adventures along the way. He was supported and guided by the goddess Athena, who always helped heroes. Upon arrival in Athens, he did not immediately reveal his identity. Aegeus offered him hospitality, but grew suspicious of this unknown young man from Troezen. Theseus attracted the animosity of the king's wife, Medea, who knew of his background and saw him as a possible threat, since Aegeus might choose him as heir instead of her own son, Medusa. But Theseus was not only strong and brave. He understood politics, and he knew he had to prove his worth and serve Athens before he could pretend to be recognized as a son of Aegeus. As the day approached for selecting a new group of 14 youths to be sent to Crete, inspired by his divine supporter Athena, he decided to volunteer as one of the 7 young men to end this horror in Crete. Aegeus began to understand that Theseus might well be the son who could take his succession, even though he was not his biological father, but he still let him go. Before departure, Theseus announced his plan to sail to Crete with a black sail and return with a white sail if victorious, signaling his triumph. The 14 youths embarked on the ship, terrified, stripped of their weapons, but treated well as they were soon to be sacrificed victims. They would be honored with a banquet upon arriving in Crete. On their arrival, the 14 Athenians were received at Minos' palace in Knossos and presented to the court. Minos had a daughter, Princess Ariadne, who was sweet and lamented the fate of the Athenians. When she saw Theseus among them, she felt uncontrollably drawn to him. Whether it was human chemistry or divine influence, no one knew, but she refused to see him sacrificed to the monster of the labyrinth. That night, Ariadne secretly escorted Theseus to the entrance of the labyrinth. The young man, who had also fallen for her, promised that if he returned alive, he would take Ariadne with him. She gave him a ball of thread and advised him to use it to avoid getting lost in the maze, along with weapons to face the monster. As soon as Theseus entered the labyrinth, he tied one end of the thread to the doorpost and began exploring the place, remaining connected to the entrance thanks to the thread. After 8 hours of exploration, he finally found the Minotaur asleep in the heart of the labyrinth. The monster was terrifying, as the legend said, over 6 feet tall, with the head of a bull and large horns. The Minotaur awoke, and a tremendous fight ensued. After several more hours of exhausting combat, Theseus overpowered the beast and stabbed it in the throat. Then, using the thread, he quickly found his way back and emerged victorious from the labyrinth. Dawn was rising, and Ariadne was still waiting for him outside. Together they returned to the palace, discreetly freeing the 13 other Athenians, the 15 of them, 7 maidens, 6 young men, plus Theseus and Ariadne, left Crete on their sailing ship. All these events had exhausted Theseus, and as his ship approached Athens, he forgot to change the sail, which was still black, not white as he promised if he returned victorious. From the shore, King Aegeus was watching the sea and waiting for the return of the one he had decided to recognize as his son. When the old king saw the black sail, he believed Theseus was dead. This loss was too much for his old heart to bear, and he committed suicide by throwing himself off a cliff into the sea, which now bears his name, the Aegean Sea. Theseus still became the king of Athens and would go on to live many other adventures. Like other mythological figures, there may have been a real person at the origin of the myth, similar to Gilgamesh in Sumerian mythology, which I told you about recently in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The existence of Theseus as a historical figure has not been proven, but some scholars believe he may have lived during the Late Bronze Age, possibly as a king around the 9th century BC. Over time, authors and the development of mythology in Athens likely added more and more details to his character. The episode with the Labyrinth and the Minotaur is just the most famous part of his myth, and it continues to inspire stories. I'm sure you recognize many tropes in it that were not necessarily created with this myth. They probably already existed. For instance, the lost son, the youth offered in sacrifice to maintain balance and social order, the hero saved by love, and the symbolism of the labyrinth as a dark underground place where one can easily get lost and where a monster hides. This metaphor works well as a representation of the human mind, attracting numerous interpretations. It may be one of the aspects of the myth that makes it so appealing and memorable. Now we still have one more myth to discuss before our little mythology night is over. Let me tell you about the myth of Prometheus. This story takes place long before the times of Perseus and Theseus, when our world was still young. The world was dominated by titans and gods, powerful beings that had been the first thinking entities to emerge from the primordial chaos and the first to reproduce. Humans populated the earth, yet they were not very different from animals. They didn't know civilization, clothing, fire, or any type of craft. They were easy prey for wild animals, having received few gifts from nature, lacking clothes, wings, large teeth, or fur to defend themselves, escape, or keep warm. The gods didn't care much for these poor creatures. Their main concern was their infighting. For 10 years, the War of the Titans or the Battle of the Gods raged between these two breeds of godly creatures. The coalition of the Titans and the Olympian gods, led by Zeus. A series of battles devastated the earth. So strong were their powers in this fight. One Titan, Prometheus, changed sides and allied with Zeus, helping the Olympians secure victory. The defeated Titans were imprisoned underground as punishment, and the Olympian gods became the unrivaled masters of the world. For his support, Prometheus was left free and could live among the gods. However, the Titan disapproved of the gods' interference to humankind's situation. The gods possessed powers and immortality, as well as many secrets they kept jealously, refusing to share with other beings out of fear that elevating others would be detrimental to them. These secrets included the mysteries of fire, technology, knowledge, and more generally, civilization. Prometheus was an outcast among the gods, and because he had turned against his own kind during the War of the Gods, they regarded him with suspicion. One day he decided to help humanity, of which he had grown fond. While the gods weren't watching, he stole the secret of fire, descended to earth, and shared it with humans. This act changed everything for mankind. With technology and the ability to create objects, humans were poised to rule over nature. Their lack of thick skin or fur could be compensated with clothes they made, and their absence of natural weapons like those of predators was no longer a problem because they could create their own, even more efficient ones. With the gift of civilization, they could live in large groups harmoniously, specialize, and multiply their power. From these basic tools, they advanced on a path of ever-increasing knowledge, leading to more meaningful lives and elevating themselves to a state somewhat similar to the gods. But the gods were jealous, and when Prometheus's theft was discovered, their wrath was boundless. Zeus sentenced the Titan to eternal torment for his transgression. He was bound to a rock atop a mountain, where each day an eagle, the emblem of Zeus, would descend from the sky to eat his liver. The liver would regenerate overnight only to be devoured again the next day, in an endless cycle. This was the price Prometheus had to pay for eternity, for helping humanity grow and dominate nature. This is the basis of the myth in various traditions around Greece. Various authors have expanded it. In some versions, Prometheus was freed centuries later, liberated from his cycle of torment by Heracles, the hero. The myth passed on to the Romans and remained very well known all the way to our times, probably because it's meaningful and contains something universal. It speaks of the human condition, the mix of animosity, of wilderness and society that tames us. It speaks of knowledge and technology that may help us strive but also have a darker side. The risk of going too far and generating unintended consequences. Technology doesn't come with wisdom. It puts ever-growing power in human hands and raises the risk of overreaching. So Prometheus gave us a terrifying gift, and he was sentenced by higher powers for that, like mankind could be sentenced by nature or higher powers. This way of seeing things had a strong echo in Western literary and scholarly traditions. In it, the myth of Prometheus is at the same time one of optimism, a celebration of human technical progress, and a cautionary tale. Disaster and punishment may be around the corner if we overreach. More elements that have parallels within the beliefs of many cultures around the world were added to the Prometheus myth along the centuries. The myth was embellished by several artists until the 5th century BC, adding especially another aspect to it, the creation of man from clay. Prometheus would have protected the human race because he would have also been its creator. Elements like the theft of fire, eternal punishment, and the creation of men from soil or clay can be found in many cultures. If you listen to the stories I made about not just Greek, but Sumerian and Polynesian mythologies, these elements keep coming back in different stories. It does not necessarily mean that these cultures had direct contacts. We can be pretty sure they didn't, based on archaeology, but rather the fact that these elements appeared in different places suggests that they are appealing to the human mind. They tend to emerge spontaneously among human societies as explanations or easy to adopt beliefs because they resonate with our condition and our experience of life. We have come to the end of our journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep, or if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.